She looked at me with this amazement. She said, "Who are you?" Because she had found out something that I had no clue what she had found out. So she called her sister. And her sister said, "I have that picture."
You are listening to Gunslinger's Shadow, an outlaw history podcast about the most prolific Wild West outlaw you've never heard of, Bill Long. It's been a while since last we recorded. We've been chasing down a bunch of things, especially David, going down the rabbit hole. And boy, oh boy, we've got some things to tell you. In this episode, we're covering a few things about Bill Long, his childhood, and I guess how we kind of figured out more things about him that were really important to understanding who he really was.
Okay, let's get started. As we go through this outlaw stuff, there's certain times when certain events were extremely pivotal in the whole picture. And so earlier on, and I'm talking about 2004, 2005, there was a pivotal point when I realized it was a lot of hard work to be able to do all this research, and I'm not sure that I want to keep doing it because I wouldn't find anything. The more we have found through the years, the more it is findable. But in the early years, there wasn't much. And I'd done one interview with Ursula Nye, and she gave us some interesting stuff about McCarty's. But at that time, it was just like, how's all this thing fit together? And then I got the chance, and I found Marianne DeFay, which is a grandson of Bill Long, which was raised, she was raised by her grandparents. Granddaughter. Did I say grandson?
I do think that her dad was his grandson, and then she is his daughter, right?
Yes. So
okay.
It'd be her great-granddad was Bill Long, but she calls him Grandpa. Anyway, so we had, it took a while to find her, and we was able to go up and interview her, and at the time I was going there, I thought, well, this will be interesting, but I had no idea what we was going to find out. So these are the events revolving around that. She said, "I distinctly remember a picture of Grandpa Long's sisters." Oh my goodness, what does that mean? Grandpa Long. So we have been looking for anything that connects Bill Long to his birth family. And here we got this lady saying, "We've got the sister's picture." No, she didn't say we've got it. She said, "I distinctly remember it." And then she goes on and describes it. She says the picture was on the wall of the downstairs of the 2-story home in Duchesne. And then she said that she gives a complete description in detail, and we're going to go through that a little bit. She said that the picture was about 36 inches by 24 inches. But then she says there were 2 young ladies about 15 to 20 years old. Both had long skirts and dark hair. Both had their hair back tight. One of them on the right was sitting down with her hands together, and she had a white velvet collar that was sitting 4 to 5 inches down below her neck.
This is her description?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
David,
what a memory.
No, you got to go back to she said that the house burnt down in 1957, and I'm interviewing her in 2004.
And she's remembering the white collar.
The house burnt down with the picture.
So when you first interviewed Marianne DeFay, she told you, "I remember the picture, but it was burned in a fire."
Yep.
Okay.
The detail is what's crazy. She had not seen this since the fire. The detail is spot on. Marianne DeFay had an incredible elephant memory, or whatever you want to call it. So then she goes on. She says the girl standing had her hair back with a little bit of it loose. How does she do that?
Yeah.
And when we look at the picture, a little bit of it's loose.
So you said you got the picture, right? But we also said it burnt down in the. How do we have the picture when it was supposed to have been gone, lost to history, burnt down in that house?
That's our story. We're going to cover that in detail here. Okay, so the girl with a little bit of it loose, then we used. She goes on. She says we call them the M&M sisters. Okay, M&M. And then she says, we used to hum a tune about it. So they had a tune. They would sing it when they saw the picture. It'd come to their minds. And you got to keep in mind that these kids are looking at this picture thinking, that's Bill Long's sisters. That's the only connection they have to his family. I was absolutely thrilled to be able to hear this, that there was really a picture of Bill Long's sisters on the wall. And then I was also led to disappointment almost immediately because the fire burnt down. This is one of those times when I think it was by appointment that we were talking about a little while ago. And we was driving south on I-15, almost into Utah from Idaho. And I'm looking at this, Mama's driving, I'm looking at the obituary. And I see on there, they always have survivors. And I see on there the survivors, and I'm reading through them. And one of the survivors' name was Ray McDonald. And that she lived in Tremont. And I happened to be 30 miles from Tremont. And so I thought, oh my goodness, just for the heck of it, we'll try. So I call up my daughter, Lisa, who lived in Tremont at the time. And I says, Lisa, can you pull out your phone book? I don't think anybody has phone books anymore, but at any rate, we did then. And she said, yeah. And she looked it up and she says, yeah, Ray McDonald. And she gave me her phone number and her address. And I'm going, wow, what do I do with this? And so I called her and she answered the phone. And I says, are you a Morel? And she said, oh, you bet I'm a Morel. And I said, have you ever heard of Bill Long? And she says, oh, yeah, I've heard a lot about Bill Long. And I go, this is cool. Because totally somebody I have no idea. I've never met her before. She knew about Bill Long. And so then I says, well, look, I'm particularly interested in finding a Bill Long's sister's picture that was on the wall before the cabin burnt down in Duchesne. And she says, I've never heard of that. But my sister, her sister, Sharon Payton, may know about that. And so I said, well, do you mind if I come by? And she said, yeah. So we had a set appointment. 10 minutes later, I show up at her door and I knocked on her door and I opened it up and she looked at me. She looked at me with this amazement. She said, who are you? Because she had found out something that I had no clue what she had found out. So she called her sister. And her sister said, I have that picture. Oh, sorry about this. This is not supposed to go this way.
It's good.
Because I look out in when I was there, it was not a big deal. Now, it's everything. She said, I not only have that picture, but I also have a letter from Viola talking to her dad when he was dying.
Oh, jeez.
So, I said, okay, great. And she says, I've got another sister that lives here. And so there's 3 of us sisters. And she says she's going to be willing to meet us in 10 minutes. And she was 10 minutes away in Honeyville. And so we arranged for her, all 3 sisters. And the one sister brought her husband. And we met over at Ray's house in Honeyville. And we go into the living room and introduce and whatnot. And she comes out right off the bat. And she says, is this what you're looking for? And she, exactly, that is the exact picture. Can you guys see that all right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if you look at that picture and you listen to the description that Marianne DeFay had given from many, many years before, the white collar is there. The girl sitting has her crossed hands. The girl standing has a little bit of loose hair. And all of them are tight hair going back. One standing, one sitting. The only difference is the left is right and right is left. They're reversed.
That's got to be like seeing a ghost. Like this picture is supposed to be gone forever in a house fire.
Yeah.
And she's bringing it out of the box and showing it to you and saying, hey, here's the picture.
Can I ask, Dad, when you first saw the picture, who did you think that they were? And they showed you the picture. Who was Bill Long and who were those sisters to you?
I had no clue. Right at the very beginning, it was like, this is the first time that anybody that I know in the family has anything to do with who Bill Long was. Yeah. So, and you got to keep it in context, is at that time, nobody, my grandma, Viola, nobody knew who Bill Long's family was. So Bill Long's own daughter didn't know. And here I am holding Bill Long's sisters, the actual sisters. Oh, my goodness. So do I know who they were? No. At that point, I had no clue. I also, at that point, thought that Bill Long could have been Billy McCarty. Mm-hmm. My sister thought it was Tom McCarty. And so then I started looking at that, and I looked at the McCarty sisters. We spent a couple of years looking at them, and one of those sisters looked really close to this one, but couldn't connect it. Mama kept saying, no, it's not the same one.
There was another clue. You said you had no clue. She gave you the clue, though, right?
She gave the most important document that we have almost. And I'm telling you what, from now I'm looking at back in retrospect, I don't think the whole Bill Long project would have happened without this picture in the letter. Mm-hmm. Even with Jerry Nickel, it was the very heart of what gave us the drive, the motivation to say, wow, we got to find these girls.
Yeah.
You know.
Now it just wasn't one random cowboy who was probably an outlaw. It was his family, his sisters.
Yeah. Well, and then about that time, then she says, I'm going to give you something else. It's going to be hard to see that, and we're going to have to post that.
Yeah.
But what I'm holding is there's 2 pages the way I've got it laid out. Mm-hmm. There's the one page, and here's the other page. You notice Sherman Payton's name I put on there. And so she brings out this, and she says, I'm not sure exactly what this is, but it had something to do with Viola.
And so these people have been looking for this forever, and they still don't, like, they have this letter, the holy grail of Bill Long research in their hands the whole time.
Well, that's a good point, Adam. What did they have when they could see it? They've got a picture of the sisters, and they got a picture. They got this letter.
I think we should read it, Dad.
It's a good time to do it because we're there.
I think we read it through.
Okay, well, you know what? It actually adds to today's story. Big time.
Real quick, Dad, before you start reading, we've sometimes talked about it as something that was on Bill Long's deathbed, and I think that's a little bit of a misnomer because we know that he killed himself.
That's true. That's a good point.
My guess is, and we could look at when and where he lived, but my guess is that a year before he died or a few months before he died, Viola wanted to know who his family was and went in and asked him. And that's my guess. But
oh, man, I just had a thought. Wow, David, on that thought. Why would Bill Long, for the first time in his entire life, be willing to tell his daughter who his family was?
Maybe he was done.
Maybe he was done. Oh, that's a little bit hairy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This might have been a couple of days before maybe he was planning on it, and he was almost done.
Yeah. Then your daughter comes to you and says, hey, Dad, tell us about your family. And for the first time ever, he says, you know what? I'm going to tell about my family.
The story of my father as near as I know. My father, William Henry Long, left his home when a very small boy. And she put in parenthesis about 6 years old. We now are convinced that he was much older. He left home and he went to a cowboy camp. Do we want to give some basis on that, David?
We already have.
We already have.
People will know what you're talking about.
Good. Okay. It seems as if grandfather went for him several times, but the cowboys hid him. They what do you call that when you take other kids?
They kidnapped him more or less.
Yeah, they kidnapped Bill Long. So it seems as if my grandfather went for him several times, but the cowboys hid him and kept my grandfather from finding him.
Bill Long's father, James Long, must have been going around what we know is probably Washington and Oregon at the time saying, hey,
yeah,
these are your sisters, come back. Or something like that.
Yeah, but since then, David, we've found that it's super likely that Hank Vaughan and Tom McCarty's camp was within 15 miles. My goodness. In later years, he met up with a fellow who had a picture of 2 girls, which my father recognized as his two sisters. My father got this picture. So Bill Long had this picture from a long time ago. He carried that picture probably in his outlaw years. And at the age of about 21, as near as he could remember, he came to Utah and later married my grandma and had 2 girls. So I am the oldest, and I am very anxious to locate some of my father's people. My father died last November 27th, 1936. Sometimes I wonder if his real name was Long. But I think I can see family resemblances in the picture. My father never would talk about his people or his past life, but very little. I think my grandfather was French, and I do remember him saying that his father was a cattleman and a farmer and lived somewhere near Boise. One of the reasons why they looked in Boise.
Not far off, Viola.
Not far off. It's so interesting to look at this letter now that we can see everything.
Yeah.
You know, they're thinking. Okay, so this is the record. So the record of my father, as near as I know. My grandfather's name was James Long. My grandmother's name was Ann Long. Brother and sisters. Abner killed by Indians, and his horse brought body home. Charles, Frank, William Henry, my father, Nelson. Lucy married Jim Moss, Sarah Selena, Mary Mahalia, Eminem, that we were talking about on the pictures. Sarah Selena, SNS, we've heard that from a different interview. They're the 2 girls that are in the picture. These names are not in order of ages, but I didn't know which was the oldest. But the picture in which I have was taken at the Lewiston, Idaho J.W. Briggs Photography Studio. So back to this picture again. And if you look on the back of the original, I saw it too, J.W. Briggs Photography Studio, in which we later researched. And we were able to determine that. And at that point, we had no clue where he was from. We didn't know he was from Columbia Center. We didn't know he was Washington. We had no clue what state, where. And so this put Bill Long somewhere in the vicinity of Lewiston, Idaho. And J.W. Briggs Photography Studio was in business somewhere between 1980 and 1885 in that time frame.
1880, 1885.
Did I say 19?
Yeah.
Okay, 1880 and 1885. And so that really makes this picture very dated. That also suggests there's some kind of a connection between the original Long family and Lewiston. So that is, you know, think about that, going from no idea where he was living in any state anywhere to now we know that he was likely living somewhere within that driving distance. Makes a huge, huge difference.
Since then, I know that you guys have done a lot of research on that. I mean, 1880 to 1885, you've connected the picture to that. You've connected some of the stuff from the letter, or I guess you were looking for some of the stuff in the letter for years, right? But then, was it after the sister's photo that you guys did the exhumation, or was that before?
Okay, so now we take this letter and the picture, and we got it connected to Lewiston, Idaho, and all of a sudden what it does for me is it becomes a lot more personal.
Yeah.
It becomes a lot more like, who's Bill Long? I'm not the first one that's had this curiosity, as we talked about. And so now we're thinking, I'm thinking, I got to put more time into this. Then I start looking around and I think, well, man, maybe, just maybe, I could do some DNA.
I don't think you would have exhumed Bill Long if
Without,
it hadn't have been for the sister's picture and the family letter. Because I think my guess is what you thought is, hey, we have the names here and we have these sisters. If we could get his DNA, we'll be able to connect it.
You know
right?
what? Yeah, and I think it's good to take a minute and tie that together. It won't take very long. And the thought came that hey, maybe we could dig his bones up, because we knew he was buried up in Duchesne. And so then I went to Salt Lake Sorensen Genetics. I talked to Kim Coopersmith, and I said, hey, I didn't think we could really do it, but if we could do this, what would it mean? And when we got the DNA, with Bill Long's actual DNA, I found a match of a guy by the name of Oscar Long that was in Baker, Oregon, which is right up in that country. And we thought, wow, there's something there, but we had no clue what it was. And at that point, Jerry hired a genealogist, paid her some money. She went up 2 or 3 generations, and then she came back 2 or 3 generations, and she found a family with the name of James and Ann Long, with the same names that's in the letter's picture, or the letter, exactly the same names.
Mm-hmm.
What we were looking at that point is that is the birth family of Bill Long.
And all that from crazy, crazy little tiny threads. A picture that was supposed to have burnt down, DNA taken from a body that's been buried for like 100 years. You know?
Yeah.
Yep. And from DNA testing that has just barely come on the scene. At the time, DNA technology had not gotten very far. And so you were able to make that match. You were able to get it all together, make those connections. And since then, the picture of his childhood, it seems to have come together a lot more because of that ground. Without that work, we wouldn't have gotten, like you were saying, anywhere. But since then, tying the DNA together with everything else, I think now you've got a much better picture of his childhood, right?
Oh, so much better. That you can't. It's just like looking. Well, you have 100 times better vision of what's going on. Now, as we look back on it, we can look at the letter and we can say, well, this is what this means. This is what this means in the picture, and this is what this means. And we can tie in Hank Vaughan, and oh my goodness, and we can tie in Tom McCarty, and everything starts to become real. Everything starts to get blown clear up. I mean, it was hard to do the exhumation. There was people that didn't like it and stopped talking to me and after because of it. But that's because they said that what good is that going to do? What's that going to do? Oh my goodness. And so when we actually took that exhumation DNA and we took the pictures and the letter of Bill's sisters and we put the two of them together in this perfect match, nobody can question that. That's exactly, and then we had to change what we think. I thought he was Bill McCarty. We had to look at that different. It changed everything. My sister had changed her Tom.
Oh, how the world
It wasn't
turns.
just magic that you thought he was Bill McCarty, right? Urshel and I said, look at the McCartys. and some of the stories that he told fit some of the McCarty robberies. And Viola had gone up into the Columbia Valley looking for her family. All of that matches the McCartys.
Oh.
There's a reason why it matches the McCartys, because the cowboy camp that they talk about in the letter was Hank Vaughan and Tom McCarty cowboy camp.
Oh, my goodness.
So when you're looking for Bill Long and you're looking at the McCartys, of course it makes sense. And of course we walked down that road, and he was hiding his true identity pretty much his whole life. And it wasn't until just before he died he shared it with his daughter. And those pieces, it's like puzzle pieces. In a way, I'm a little bit sad that we didn't track in sort of a documentary format, because initially it was discovery about this not then famous, but now starting to become famous outlaw. And now we look back and it's almost like family history. Okay, they lived here. Okay, he's from here. But at the time we were discovering, as Adam says, the most prolific Wild West outlaw that you've never heard, right? So anyway, from that letter, we discovered his true family. James Long and Ann Harvey is her last name. She married James Long, I think, in the 1840s. And they're from Illinois. Actually, Ann Harvey is from England, but her immigrated when she was something like a teenager. And James Long's family, I think, is originally from Virginia, Ohio. But they pretty much built where Bill Long was born and where they lived is in a little township called Orion Township, Fulton County, Illinois. Right?
Yep.
Because like the McCartys and like many other families, they came west something like 1877-ish. Bill Long's family came west on the Oregon Trail, and they settled in southeastern Washington to what is now a ghost town. It's called Columbia Center, and that is the place you've been, right, Dad?
Yes. How did how did you find out that Charles Long was on that Columbia Trail as a little kid and got lost from his family?
That's a whole story, right?
Sorry, that's a whole.
No. Well, this is part of it, and actually we're going to go over it in just a minute. But I want to talk about a few stories from Bill Long's kind of youth in Columbia Center. We have the story in the letter about Abner Long, Bill Long's oldest brother, I think, being killed by Indians, and the horse bringing back his body. What is that?
Yeah. And did that happen in Illinois, or did that happen with the Nez Perce in Idaho?
Unclear.
Does David, from your research, is there an Abner anywhere in the Bill Long family?
There is a son, because the Long family lived in Iowa, not very far from the McCartys, by the way. I don't think it's connected, but they lived about 20 miles from the McCartys in the mid-50s, before Bill Long was born. And there is a child, a son there, and he disappears. So that's probably him.
So probably back east, because I've been also to the McCarty Ranch there, and it's very, at the time I actually think it was in Missouri, because they changed the little borders, but it was the very southernmost, westernmost corner within like 5 miles of Iowa.
Right on the edge, right?
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, the McCartys lived there too. I think it was a wild place, particular for native wars at that time.
Yeah.
It could have been then, and because he doesn't show up on any future censuses after that. So,
was that part of what pushed them out west?
Well, they had heard stories. Basically, Oregon was like the land of milk and honey, more or less. They heard it was green and there was free land. During the 50s, apparently the UK wanted to, basically they had made a deal. I don't know the details of this, so I apologize if any historians are listening, but England and the United States were in a rush to get the most people into Oregon as they could, and whoever had the most people there were going to claim it.
Oh.
So that's partially why everyone was going to Oregon. Like, why weren't they going to California or Washington? They were going to Oregon. That's why it's the Oregon Trail. Is that what pushed them west? I don't think so. There's just more Native American problems out west.
True.
Yeah.
There's just more. But they went west looking for opportunity. I think that's what they were looking for.
Yep.
Free land, good work, that kind of thing. Dad, can you tell us about your visit there?
Yes. So years ago, a long time ago, probably 2010, I was searching the McCarty connections, and for reasons that I still don't know today, we had found a live descendant up there. I drove all the way up to Walla Walla and then moved and came around to the little town of Pomeroy. Happens to be about 10 miles from Lewiston. And I met this lady. I do not remember her name. She gave me about 10 really good McCarty pictures. I mean, really good ones that is not in the history books. All the way from Bill and Tom and the families and Bill's McCarty's whole family with Letty and the 3 kids. Pictures that I'd never seen before, and it was really good. What I didn't know when I went up there to interview her is that I had no clue that was the very same town or area within like 5 miles that Bill Long's family, or Bill, was actually raised in part right there in that town. I had no clue. Was that connected?
You were looking for Bill Long. You were on the trail of the McCartys, and you were within 5 miles of his, like, kind of childhood home.
Yeah. Drove right through town, and I left and didn't know. We didn't know that for 10 or 15 years later.
Have you guys been there since?
They have to be connected.
Have you been there since finding out?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I said last maybe 3 years ago. You know me, I like to actually get my hands on every site that we find. Okay, since then we find out from this letter and from all these other things and David's research that they were connected with Columbia Center. And so, and being a river runner, we was up there running rivers, and we drove up there to take a look around. And we went to Pomeroy, and then we went up on the top of the hill and went to the old schoolhouse that was probably standing back then, still there, just to see it. There wasn't a whole lot to see, per se, there. The lady that I'd interviewed before has long since been passed on, which is the story of my life. Everybody I've interviewed dies. I don't know what I'm going to do about that.
think that Columbia Center, which is where James and Anne Long eventually settled, and Anne Long died quickly thereafter, it's a really interesting ghost town. It's just to the south of Pahata Flats. Is that how you pronounce that, Dan?
I call it
Flats?
Pahata.
Pahata Flats.
Yeah.
And it's in a small ravine, more or less, like a draw.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was in the center of the county. I think it's Garfield County, Washington.
So when you're in Pomeroy, that country has got a lot of high ground, and then it's got these canyons with rivers in it that's lower.
Okay.
So in Pomeroy is on a river. And then you leave Pomeroy, you drive up a couple of switchbacks, and you get up on these flats, and you go about 3 miles, and there's the Pahata Flats. That's why they call it that. And that's high ground. Back where we're at is kind of opposite of that. The flats are down low. But there, it's the high ground's flat. And then you drive past that another 3 or 4 miles, then you drop back into another canyon where there's a river. And it's that Columbia Center is gorgeous country. I wouldn't.
Oh, is it?
There. Yeah.
And it's right in the foothills of the Blue Mountains, which are on the border of Washington and northern Oregon. They straddle the border there. And this ghost town back then in the 1870s was a boom town, more or less. It had, as far as I can tell from the record, it had a couple of sawmills, had a couple of saloons, had a post office, of which Ransom Long was the postmaster. And so it had a couple of stores. They grew a lot of wheat, and they had some of the best cattle in all of the Northwest.
To add to that a little bit, when you go up there and you drive around and you see it, oh my goodness, there's so much grass up there. It is the most ideal place for raising cows. And that's why Tom and Hank Vaughan was hanging around there, because at that point they was running that huge cattle wrestling operation. Well, why were they doing it right there? Because there was tons of cattle there. That was a big business in that country at that time.
So one of the stories which I think really brings out Bill Long's character is, and we think this happened at Columbia Center.
I'm thinking it's a Jackson story. You know what? I'll bet you my grandma told it. Bill Long's parents were active in a church. And apparently every Sunday after church, the preacher would sit down with Bill Long's dad, James, and they would just talk about things or whatever they want to talk about in a Sunday afternoon. And it was a common occurrence. The problem was that Bill Long apparently had a little bit different thought process. He was probably, we think at this point, 14 or 15 years old, probably very rebellious. Yeah, in fact, I know he was very rebellious. And so he didn't like church. And he wouldn't, and so when they were in church one time, and he was able to see that the preacher's pipe and his dad's pipe was there, and so he picked up the preacher's pipe, and he got a really hot idea. And so he took the pipe, just like an old pipe, and he took the part where the tobacco is, and he took the little filler out, and then he took all the tobacco, and he dumped it out, and then he poured in gunpowder. And then, of course, he takes the little padding and he puts it back in, sets it right back where he found it. Uh-oh. And I don't know the little details of exactly what happened, but the preacher came back. He must have lit the pipe. It must have blown up in his face. And he must have realized at that point he was in trouble by Dad. And so the story goes, and I think it's absolutely probably correct, is that he went out on his horse and he put a bunch of food together or whatever he did, and he left home before, that's right, I remember now. Grandma talked about it. He left before the preacher got there, before they even lit the pipe, because he knew he was in trouble, and he never came back home.
So I think you can see Bill Long's, he might have even planned this whole thing, or maybe he thought through it after he put the gunpowder in the pipe, but one way or another, he's heading out of town.
So,
the bottom line is, whenever Bill Long went to a cowboy camp and he didn't come back, and they were protecting him, and we're gonna end here because we have plenty of material. But Hank Vaughan, Tom McCarty, they were running stolen horses through the Blue Mountains and selling them to the Nez Perce tribe in central Idaho, central western Idaho. And also stealing cattle, rustling cattle.
Big time.
They were the cowboys in this area. Not just the cowboys. They were the nefarious, lawless cowboys that were becoming outlaws.
So who was Tom McCarty in Hank Vaughan to Bill Long? He was their mentor.
Yep.
He was the one, as a 14-year-old kid, that was taken under the hem of these outlaws that says, hey, come here, I'll tell you about life. I'll teach you about the other side of life. And Bill Long was that kind because he was rebellious.
I mean, how many other cowboy camps are there around that area at the time, right? You got Bill Long's childhood home right in the middle. These outlaws are driving their cattle right past his house, right?
Certainly there were other cattlemen. Certainly there are people running cattle probably all over the Blue Mountains. But whenever you hear the stories, and I think Charlie Long really drives home that story, and we're going to talk, that'll be next week, right?
Cool.
Charlie Long's story that really brings it home to, well, was it Hank Vaughan and Tom McCarty that was that? Yeah, there were other cattlemen, but not ones that were going to hide him, not ones that were going to teach him to become an outlaw, which he did become. A really cool story there with Hank Vaughan, and
that's going to be
every
real
time
fun
we go
to
through this, it brings home again to me like what a story this is.
This is kind of the beginning of the Wild West, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's other things that are going on, but this is like the start of the Wild West is with basically Hank Vaughan and the McCarty brothers.
But interesting enough, time-wise, this was way before Butch Cassidy. It was way before. Right. The McCartys were probably 5 to 10 to 15 years before the Wild Bunch even started up.
Bill Long, I think, really ties it all together. I think he became the centerpiece of what it meant to be an outlaw, but Tom started it. He was the guy that was willing to go to whatever ends he needed to go to take money from whoever he needed to take it from, to do whatever his motivations were. But and then you can see a young Bill Long running into Tom McCarty and Hank Vaughan and saying, "This is my crew. these are the guys."
I don't think Bill Long that day just happenstance says, "I need a place to go and I'll go to the cowboy camp." I am guessing that he had come into their camp once, twice, 3 times, knew them, and when he got in trouble, he knew that he could go there.
Yeah, me too. All right, guys. Well, we could talk about this all day, but I think we have a lot here, Dad and Adam. Thank you so much for taking the time. We have so much more to say. Next time, we're going to talk about Charlie Long, Hank Vaughan, and the end of basically Bill Long's childhood. And then where does he go? He goes right to Wyoming, the Johnson County War, and Cattle Kate, and maybe some other aliases that nobody have heard about Bill Long.
All right, we'll see it.